"It's not just dirt, it's trying to tell us something," the little girl whispered, her voice barely louder than the wind moving through the broken fence posts, and for a moment even the night seemed to pause as if it were listening too, because out there on that forgotten 1-acre patch of land just outside Millfield, where the grass grew uneven and the soil looked like it had given up years ago, a German shepherd was digging like his life depended on it, his paws tearing through the earth with a rhythm that didn't feel random, didn't feel wild, but purposeful, almost urgent, like he knew something no one else did, and standing a few feet behind him, wrapped in an oversized hoodie that slipped past her knees, 8-year-old Lily Brooks held a small flashlight with both hands, the beam shaking slightly as she tried to keep it steady on the spot where the dog kept returning again and again, the same exact spot, no matter how far he wandered during the day, no matter how tired he seemed. He always came back here when the world got quiet, when no one was watching, except tonight someone was, because Lily had noticed, she always noticed things other people didn't, like how the man who owned this land never looked anyone in the eye when they laughed at him, or how he walked with that slow, careful step like every movement had to be earned, like he carried something heavier than what people could see. His name was Jack Turner, and just 3 weeks ago the whole town had watched him buy this land for $1 at an auction that no one even bothered to attend until they heard the price, and then they came, not to bid, but to watch, to smirk, to whisper, because a broken-down veteran with worn boots and a quiet voice buying worthless dirt felt like a joke they all wanted to be part of, and Jack had stood there, saying almost nothing, signing the papers with a hand that didn't tremble, not once, even when someone in the back laughed out loud and said, "You just bought yourself a grave, old man," and Jack didn't answer, didn't react, just folded the paper, nodded once, and walked away like he knew something they didn't, and maybe he did, because now, under a sky stretched wide with stars and silence, his dog, Rex, dug deeper, faster, the sound of paws hitting soil sharp against the stillness, until suddenly there was a different sound, a dull, hollow clink, not rock, not root, something else, something buried too perfectly to be natural, and Lily's breath caught as she stepped closer without thinking, the flashlight beam locking onto the spot as Rex froze, ears up, body tense, staring at the ground like it had just spoken back to him, and in that quiet second, with the wind brushing past her face and the smell of earth rising into the air, Lily felt it, not fear, not excitement, something deeper, something that made her whisper again, softer this time, "Rex, what did you find?" Jack Turner did not hear the metal at first, not the way Lily did, not the way Rex felt it beneath his paws, because he was still standing back by the edge of the property line where the broken wooden fence leaned inward like it had given up trying to stand straight years ago, his hands resting loosely at his sides, his eyes fixed not on the ground but on the horizon beyond it, where the faint glow of Millfield streetlights blurred into the dark, and for a long second he said nothing, as if silence was something he trusted more than noise. But Rex did not wait, the dog let out a low, focused bark and struck the ground again, once, twice, and that hollow sound came back, clearer now, sharper, impossible to ignore, and that was when Jack finally moved, slow at first, then quicker, each step measured but certain as he crossed the uneven dirt toward them, his boots pressing into soil that most people in town had called worthless, useless, a waste, and yet here it was answering back. Lily stepped aside instinctively, holding the flashlight higher so the beam caught Jack's face as he approached, and for a moment she saw something shift in his expression, not surprise, not excitement, something older than that, something like recognition, like a memory brushing up against the present. "Back up a little," he said quietly, his voice steady, not commanding, just certain, and Lily obeyed without question, taking 2 small steps back while Rex circled once and then sat, alert, watching Jack as if waiting for him to understand. Jack crouched down slowly, one knee pressing into the dirt as he reached forward with his bare hand, brushing away loose soil where Rex had dug, his fingers moving carefully, deliberately, until they met resistance, flat, cold, and unmistakably shaped by something other than nature. He paused there, his hand resting against it, and for a second the night seemed to hold its breath again, even the wind easing off as if giving space to whatever was about to be uncovered. Lily leaned forward just slightly, her flashlight trembling as the beam locked onto the edge of something metallic, dull and worn but solid, too straight to be random. "Is that a box?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack did not answer right away. he shifted his hand, clearing more dirt, revealing a corner, then a seam, and finally a surface that reflected just enough light to confirm what they were both thinking. "No," he said quietly, almost to himself, "not a box," and then he exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carried weight, history, something unspoken. "A door." Lily blinked, her mind trying to catch up. A door did not belong under a field like this, not under a piece of land everyone had laughed at, not under something that cost less than a cup of coffee, and yet there it was, buried just beneath the surface, like it had been waiting, like it had been hiding. Rex stood again, stepping closer, his nose hovering just inches above the metal as if confirming what he already knew, and Jack's hand lingered on the surface a second longer before he pulled it back, his gaze lifting briefly toward the dark outline of the town in the distance, where people had already decided who he was, what he was worth, and what this land could never be, and then he looked back down at the hidden door, his eyes narrowing slightly, not in confusion, but in focus, like a man who had just found the beginning of something he had not been able to finish a long time ago. "We are going to need tools," he said finally, his voice calm but carrying a quiet certainty that made Lily's chest tighten in a way she could not explain, because this did not feel like luck, it did not feel like chance, it felt like something had been waiting for exactly this moment, for this night, for this dog, for this man, and for some reason, for her too. The shovel hit the ground just before midnight, the metal edge biting into the soil with a dull, heavy sound that seemed louder than it should have been in the quiet, and Lily stood a few feet away, both hands wrapped around the flashlight as she watched Jack work with a rhythm that felt practiced, not rushed, each movement controlled, like he had done this before in another life, in another place where digging meant something very different. Rex stayed close, pacing in tight circles around the spot, his ears flicking at every sound, every shift of dirt, as if he was guarding something they had not even fully uncovered yet, and the deeper Jack dug, the clearer the shape became, the metal surface stretching wider than they had first thought, not just a small hatch but something larger, something built with intention, the edges lined straight and clean beneath the layers of packed earth. "How long do you think it has been down there?" Lily asked softly, her voice careful not to disturb the moment. Jack paused for just a second, leaning on the shovel as he looked down, his breath visible in the cool night air. "Long enough for people to forget," he said, and then he went back to work, the sound of metal against soil repeating, steady, almost hypnotic, until finally the outline was clear, a rectangular door set into the ground, roughly 4 feet wide and 6 feet long, with a handle that had been buried just beneath the surface, worn but still intact. Lily stepped closer again, drawn in despite herself, the flashlight beam tracing the edges as if trying to understand it. "Why would there be a door under a farm?" she asked, and this time Jack did not answer right away. He set the shovel aside and crouched down, brushing off the remaining dirt from the handle with his hand, slower now, more deliberate, as if every inch revealed mattered. Rex stopped pacing and stood still beside him, watching, waiting. Jack's fingers wrapped around the handle, testing it gently, not pulling yet, just feeling the weight of it, and in that moment something shifted in his face again, that same quiet recognition, that same sense that this was not entirely new to him. Lily noticed it, even if she could not explain it. "You knew something was here," she said, not as a question, but as a realization, and Jack's hand tightened slightly on the metal. He did not look at her, his eyes fixed on the door. "I knew this land was not empty," he replied, his voice low, steady, and that was all he said. But it was enough to make the air feel heavier, like there were pieces of a story still buried deeper than the metal beneath them. The wind picked up just slightly, brushing across the open field, carrying with it the distant hum of a truck passing somewhere far off on the highway, a reminder that the rest of the world was still moving, still unaware of what was happening here in the dark. Jack shifted his stance, planting one boot firmly beside the edge of the door as he finally pulled. The metal resisted at first, a deep, stubborn weight holding it in place as if it had not been touched in years, but Jack did not rush. He adjusted his grip, leaned his weight into it, and pulled again, slower, steadier, until there was a faint creak, low and stretched, like something waking up after a long silence. Lily's breath caught, her fingers tightening around the flashlight as the beam shook slightly. Rex let out a soft, focused sound. Not a bark, not a growl, just a signal that something was changing, and then the door shifted, just an inch, but it was enough. enough to break the seal of dirt and time that had kept it hidden. Jack paused again, his hand still on the handle, his shoulders rising and falling with a slow breath, and for the first time since they had started digging, he looked at Lily, really looked at her, his eyes steady but carrying something deeper, something that felt like a warning and an invitation all at once. "Once we open this," he said quietly, "nothing about this place stays the same," and Lily did not step back, did not look away, she simply nodded, her voice small but certain as she answered, "Then we should not leave it closed." The metal groaned louder this time, a long, low sound that stretched into the night as Jack pulled again, the door lifting another inch, then another, the packed dirt along its edges cracking loose and falling away in small clumps, and with each movement the air seemed to shift, cooler somehow, as if something sealed beneath the ground for years was beginning to breathe again. Lily instinctively took a step closer, the beam of her flashlight sliding into the narrow gap that had opened, but it was too dark to see anything yet, only a depth that swallowed the light before it could settle. Rex moved forward immediately, his body tense but controlled, his nose hovering near the opening, ears pointed forward as if he was listening to something far below. Jack adjusted his grip and lifted higher, his muscles straining just enough to show the weight of the door, but his movement stayed steady, careful, like he understood that rushing this moment would break something more than just the hinge, and then with one final pull the door shifted fully, tilting open with a heavy thud as it leaned against the uneven ground beside it, exposing a dark rectangular opening carved cleanly into the earth, about 4 feet across, the edges reinforced with old steel that had held its shape despite the years. Lily's breath caught as she angled the flashlight downward again, the beam finally reaching something solid this time. A set of narrow steps leading down, each one made of concrete, worn but intact, disappearing into a darkness that felt deeper than it should have been for something buried beneath a simple field. "There are stairs," she whispered, her voice echoing faintly as if the space below was larger than expected. Jack remained still for a moment, standing at the edge of the opening, his gaze fixed downward, not hesitant, not afraid, but calculating, measuring, like he was matching what he saw with something already stored in his memory, something he had not spoken out loud. Rex let out a soft, focused sound again and then stepped closer, placing one paw carefully on the first step as if testing it, but he did not go further. He looked back at Jack instead, waiting. Always waiting. Jack exhaled slowly, running a hand briefly across the back of his neck before stepping forward, stopping just at the edge. "Stay behind me," he said quietly, not turning around, but Lily nodded anyway, even though he could not see it, her hands tightening around the flashlight as she angled it to follow him. Jack lowered one boot onto the first step, testing it with his weight. The concrete held firm, solid, unmoving. And then he descended one step, then another, his figure gradually lowering into the darkness as the light followed, the beam catching the walls now, smooth and reinforced, not rough dirt but something constructed, deliberate, built to last. The air below looked different somehow, heavier, carrying a faint metallic scent that rose upward as the space opened. Lily hesitated for just a second before following, her small shoes stepping carefully where Jack had stepped, Rex moving between them, his body close, protective, the sound of their footsteps soft but clear in the enclosed space, each step echoing slightly as they went deeper. 10 steps, then 15, then 20, until the ground leveled out and Jack stopped, the flashlight beam widening as Lily lifted it higher. And that was when the darkness finally gave way to something else, something unexpected. Rows of metal containers stacked neatly along the walls, each one sealed, each one labeled with markings that had faded but were still visible enough to show that this place had not been random, had not been forgotten by accident. This had been built, organized, hidden on purpose. Lily's eyes widened as the light moved across the room, catching edges, corners, shapes that made her chest tighten with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. "What is this place?" she asked softly, her voice barely more than a breath. Jack did not answer right away. He stepped forward slowly, his hand brushing against one of the containers, his fingers tracing the worn lettering as if reading something only he could understand, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a quiet weight that settled into the space around them. "Something that was never meant to be found," he said, and in that moment, standing beneath the ground that everyone had laughed at, it became clear that whatever this was, it was not just about what was buried, it was about why it had been hidden in the first place. The silence inside the underground room did not feel empty, it felt full, like the air itself was holding on to something that had been locked away for years, and Lily stood still beside Jack, her flashlight slowly moving across the rows of metal containers as if each one might suddenly reveal its purpose if she looked long enough, but none of them moved, none of them gave anything away, they just sat there in quiet order, stacked with a precision that made it clear this place had not been built. In a hurry, Rex walked forward carefully, his paws making soft, controlled sounds against the concrete floor, his nose lowering toward one of the containers before lifting again, scanning the space, alert but not alarmed, and that alone made Jack's shoulders ease just slightly, because the dog trusted this place enough to stay calm, and that meant something. Jack stepped deeper into the room, his hand brushing along the side of a container until he reached the first latch. It was rusted but intact, the metal worn smooth in spots as if it had been handled often long ago. He paused there, his fingers resting on it, not opening it yet, just feeling it, like he was listening through his hands instead of his ears. Lily watched him closely, the way he moved, the way he hesitated, not out of fear but out of respect, like this place belonged to a time he understood better than she ever could. What if it is dangerous? She asked softly, the question hanging in the air between them. Jack finally looked at her, his expression steady, calm in a way that did not dismiss her concern but did not give in to it either. If it was meant to hurt someone, it would not have been sealed this carefully, he said, and then his gaze returned to the latch. This was meant to be kept safe. Lily nodded slowly, the words settling into her as she shifted her grip on the flashlight, angling it so the light fell directly over Jack's hands. Rex moved closer again, sitting just beside Jack as if he understood that whatever happened next mattered. Jack took a breath, slow and controlled, and then lifted the latch. The metal resisted at first, a faint scraping sound echoing through the room, but it gave way under steady pressure, the lid of the container lifting just an inch before stopping, and Jack paused again, his hands still on it, as if even now he was giving whatever was inside a moment before being revealed. Lily leaned forward slightly, her heart beating faster, not from fear but from the weight of the unknown, and then Jack lifted the lid fully, the hinges creaking softly as the top opened, and the light from Lily's flashlight spilled inside, catching something that did not match the dull metal around it, something that reflected back, muted but unmistakable, rows of tightly packed bundles, sealed and organized, their edges clean, their presence deliberate. Lily's breath caught as she stared, her mind trying to understand what she was seeing. Jack did not move right away, his eyes fixed on the contents, not surprised, not shocked, but heavy with recognition, like a piece of a story had just fallen into place exactly where it belonged. It is money, Lily whispered, her voice barely forming the words as if saying them too loudly might make it disappear. Jack nodded once, slow, deliberate. A lot of it, he said quietly, and the room seemed to shift again, not physically but in meaning. Because this was no longer just a hidden space, it was something far bigger, something that reached beyond the edges of the farm above them. Lily looked around at the other containers, her voice trembling slightly now with realization. There is more, isn't there? Jack followed her gaze, taking in the rows, the structure, the scale, and he exhaled slowly, the weight of it settling into him. Yeah, he said, his voice steady but deeper now, this is just the beginning. And in that moment, beneath the quiet field that everyone had dismissed, it became clear that what Rex had found was not just buried metal or forgotten history, it was something powerful enough to change everything, not just for Jack, not just for Lily, but for anyone who learned what was hidden beneath that $1 piece of land. Jack did not reach for another container right away, even though the room around him was filled with them, even though the quiet weight of what they had just uncovered pressed in from every side, because something in him understood that moving too fast now would mean missing something important, something that was not written on the surface. Lily could feel it too, the shift in the air, the way the discovery had changed from excitement into something deeper, something that required thought. Why would someone leave all of this here? She asked softly, her eyes still fixed on the open container, the bundles stacked with a precision that made it clear this was not forgotten by accident. Jack closed the lid slowly, the metal settling back into place with a muted sound that echoed faintly in the room. They did not leave it, he said, his voice low and certain, they hid it, and that single word seemed to settle into the walls around them. Lily looked up at him, her brow furrowing. slightly as she tried to follow the difference. From who? She asked, and Jack's gaze shifted, not to her, but to the far side of the room where more containers sat in perfect order. That is the question, he replied. Rex stood suddenly, his ears lifting as his head turned toward the stairwell behind them, the faintest sound drifting down, not loud, not clear, just enough to make the dog notice. Jack's posture changed instantly, not tense, but alert, the kind of awareness that came from years of training. Stay close, he said quietly, his voice calm but firm. Lily felt her chest tighten slightly as she turned the flashlight toward the stairs, the beam stretching up the concrete steps into darkness, but nothing moved, nothing appeared, only silence answered them. Rex took a step toward the stairs, then stopped, glancing back at Jack as if waiting for direction. Jack listened for another moment, his head tilted just slightly, but whatever had caught Rex's attention did not come again. The stillness returned, heavy and complete, and after a few seconds Jack nodded once, more to himself than to anyone else. Probably just the wind catching the door, he said, though his eyes lingered a second longer before he turned back. Lily exhaled quietly, not realizing she had been holding her breath, the flashlight lowering again as the beam returned to the room. Should we tell someone? She asked, the question simple but carrying more weight than it seemed. Jack did not answer immediately. He walked a few steps farther into the room, his boots echoing softly as he looked over the rows again, measuring, thinking, his hand brushing briefly against another container without opening it. If we tell the wrong person, this disappears, he said finally, his voice steady, and so do the answers. Lily considered that, her eyes moving from one container to another, trying to imagine all of it gone, hidden again, or worse, taken by someone who did not care why it was here in the first place. Rex returned to her side, sitting close, his body leaning lightly against her leg as if grounding her in the moment. Then who is the right person? She asked, and Jack stopped walking, his shoulders still, his gaze lowering slightly as if the answer was not as simple as it should have been. For a moment he said nothing, and in that silence the truth of the situation became clearer than any explanation. This was not just a discovery, it was a decision, one that would shape everything that came after. Jack turned back toward her slowly, his expression calm but resolved. We find out what this is first, he said, before anyone else gets the chance to decide for us. Lily nodded, the fear she had felt moments ago replaced now with something steadier, something stronger, a quiet agreement that whatever they had uncovered did not belong to chance anymore. It belonged to them, at least for now. And as the light from her flashlight moved once more across the containers, catching the edges, the corners, the scale of what lay hidden beneath the ground, it became clear that this was no longer just a secret waiting to be found, it was a truth waiting to be understood. And somewhere above them, beyond the layers of dirt and silence, the world still believed that nothing of value existed on that land, and for the moment, that belief was the only thing keeping this discovery safe. Jack did not sleep that night, not really, even after they climbed back up the narrow concrete steps and sealed the metal door as carefully as they had opened it, brushing dirt back over the edges, scattering loose soil with the flat of the shovel until the ground looked untouched again, until the land returned to the same quiet, empty lie that everyone in town believed. But beneath that lie something had changed. Something had been uncovered that could not simply be buried again. And as the first pale line of morning stretched across the horizon, Jack stood on the edge of the field with his hands in his jacket pockets, staring out at the land like he was seeing it for the first time and the last time all at once. Rex sat beside him, still, watchful, his eyes moving between Jack and the ground as if he understood that whatever came next would matter more than what had already been found. Lily stood a few steps behind them, her small shoes damp with dew, her flashlight now off and hanging loosely at her side, but her eyes wide awake, following every shift in Jack's posture, every breath he took, because she could feel it too, the weight of a decision forming in the quiet. You knew it was here, she said again, her voice clearer now in the morning air, not questioning, just stating what had become impossible to ignore. Jack did not turn right away, his gaze still fixed on the land, but his shoulders lifted slightly with a slow breath, and when he spoke, his voice carried something deeper than before, something that had been held back until now. Not exactly, he said, but I knew something was wrong about this place. He paused, then finally turned to face her, his eyes steady, not guarded anymore, just honest in a way that felt heavier than any explanation. Years ago, before I left the service, there were rumors, quiet ones, about emergency reserves, assets that were never logged, never claimed, stored off record in places no one would think to look. Lily listened closely, her brow tightening slightly as she tried to follow. Like a secret? She asked, and Jack nodded once. Not just a secret, he said, a contingency. The word hung between them. Unfamiliar but important. Rex stood as Jack shifted his weight, pacing once in a small circle before settling again, the dog's calm presence grounding the moment. So you came here because of that? Lily asked, and Jack gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. I came here because it was the only piece of land no one wanted, he said, and sometimes that is where people hide what matters most. Lily looked down at the field, at the uneven patches of grass, the cracked fence, the forgotten look of it all, and for the first time she saw it differently, not as something broken, but as something chosen, something intentional. Then why did they not come back for it? She asked quietly, and Jack's expression shifted just slightly, a shadow passing through his eyes, not fear, not regret, just something unresolved. Maybe they could not, he said, or maybe they thought no one would ever find it. The wind moved gently across the field, carrying the faint sound of a truck in the distance, the world waking up beyond the edges of this moment, and Jack glanced toward the road briefly, his gaze narrowing just a fraction. Which means if anyone else starts asking questions, this place will not stay quiet for long, he added. Lily felt that settle into her, the idea that what they had found was not just hidden, it was vulnerable now, exposed in a way it had not been before. Rex let out a low, steady breath and stepped closer to Jack, pressing lightly against his leg, and Jack rested a hand briefly on the dog's head, grounding himself in that contact. We need to move carefully, he said, more to himself than to her, but Lily heard it anyway. She nodded, her voice firm despite her age. Then we do it together, she said, and Jack looked at her again, really looked this time, not as a child who had stumbled into something too big, but as someone who had chosen to stay, someone who understood that walking away was no longer an option, and after a moment he gave a single nod in return, quiet but certain, because whether he had planned it or not, this was no longer just his discovery, it belonged to all three of them now. And as the sun finally broke over the horizon, casting light across the field that everyone else still believed was worth nothing, the truth beneath it waited, silent and patient, knowing that it would not stay hidden for much longer. By mid-morning the town had already started talking, not because anyone had seen what was buried beneath the field, but because something about Jack Turner no longer fit the version of him they had grown comfortable laughing at. He was moving differently now, not faster, not louder, but with a quiet focus that made people notice even if they could not explain why. And that alone was enough to draw attention in a place like Millfield where nothing ever stayed unnoticed for long. Lily sat on the edge of the old fence post, watching the road as a pickup truck slowed just slightly as it passed, the driver glancing toward the field longer than necessary before continuing on. They are starting to look, she said quietly, and Jack nodded once, his eyes following the dust trail left behind as it faded into the distance. Rex stood beside him, alert but calm, his gaze shifting between the road and the ground as if he understood that both now mattered equally. That is how it starts, Jack replied, his voice low. First curiosity, then questions, then someone decides they need answers more than you do. Lily tightened her grip on the edge of the fence, her small fingers pressing into the rough wood. Then we should go back down, she said, before someone else does. Jack looked at her, not surprised, just measuring the weight of what she was suggesting, and after a moment he gave a slight nod. We will, he said, but not the same way. He turned toward the small shed at the edge of the property, the one structure everyone had ignored because it looked like it might collapse under its own weight, and began walking toward it, Rex immediately falling into step beside him, Lily following close behind, her eyes moving between them, trying to anticipate what came next. Inside the shed the air was cooler, filled with the faint smell of old wood and dust, but Jack did not hesitate. He moved to the back wall where a stack of forgotten tools leaned against the boards, pushing them aside carefully until a section of the wall came into view that did not quite match the rest, the wood slightly newer, the nails set with a precision that stood out once you knew to look for it. Lily stepped closer, her eyes narrowing slightly as she saw it too. That was not there before, she said, and Jack allowed the faintest hint of a smile to touch his expression, not amusement, but recognition. No, he said quietly. It was not meant to be seen. He reached out and pressed against the panel. And after a brief moment it shifted, just enough to reveal a narrow gap behind it. Lily's breath caught as she leaned forward, the space beyond darker than the shed itself, tighter, more controlled. Another way in, she whispered, and Jack nodded. A safer one, he said. Rex moved closer to the opening, his body lowering slightly as he peered inside, his ears flicking as if listening for something beyond the immediate space. Jack crouched down and reached into the gap, pulling out a small, weathered metal box that had been hidden just inside. He opened it without hesitation, revealing a set of old documents sealed in protective sleeves. Lily's flashlight beam caught the edges as he lifted one carefully, unfolding it just enough to see the markings, coordinates, labels, signatures that had faded but not disappeared. Her eyes widened as she tried to make sense of it. Is that a map? She asked, and Jack nodded slowly. His gaze fixed on the page. Not just a map, he said, his voice quieter now, heavier. A record. He turned it slightly so the light hit the surface more clearly, revealing lines that extended beyond the boundaries of this one property, beyond this one town. This is not the only place. Lily felt something shift inside her, something bigger than curiosity now, something that made her realize that what they had found was not just hidden, it was part of something much larger. Something that had been planned long before any of them had ever set foot. Here, Rex let out a low, steady sound, not a warning, not fear, just awareness, and Jack folded the document carefully, placing it back into the box before closing it again, his movements deliberate, controlled, as if he understood that every second now mattered. We are not just protecting what is here, he said, standing slowly as he looked at both Lily and Rex, his expression firm, resolved. We are protecting what it leads to. And outside, beyond the thin walls of the shed, the quiet town continued to wake, unaware that beneath its calm surface, something had already begun to change. The sun had climbed higher now, casting a steady light across the field that once looked forgotten but now felt like the center of something far larger than the town surrounding it, and Jack stood just outside the shed with the small metal box in his hands, its weight no longer measured in ounces but in consequence. Lily stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the horizon where a second vehicle slowed as it passed, this time not even pretending to hide its interest, and Rex remained close, his posture calm but attentive, every shift in the air reflected in the slight turn of his head. They are going to come back, Lily said quietly, and Jack nodded, not with worry, but with acceptance. Yes, he replied, and when they do, they will not be asking. He looked down at the box for a moment before closing his eyes briefly, as if aligning his thoughts with something deeper than the moment itself, and when he opened them again, the hesitation that had been there before was gone, replaced by something steady, something decided. He turned and walked back toward the shed, Lily following without a word, Rex moving ahead of them this time as if guiding the way. Inside, the hidden panel was already slightly ajar, and Jack pushed it open fully, revealing the narrow passage once more, but this time there was no pause, no hesitation. He stepped inside immediately, Lily close behind, her flashlight cutting through the tight darkness as the air grew cooler again, more still, more deliberate. And when they reached the lower chamber, the rows of containers seemed unchanged, silent and patient, but now they felt different, not just hidden, but waiting. Jack moved directly to the first container they had opened, lifting the lid once more with a controlled motion, the contents inside catching the light just as before, but this time he did not linger. He reached in and removed one sealed bundle, holding it briefly before setting it aside, then another, and another, until a small space cleared at the top, and beneath the layers, something else appeared, something flat, something structured differently from the rest. Lily leaned closer, her breath catching slightly as Jack carefully lifted it free, a sealed folder, thicker than the others, marked with faded lettering that still carried weight. What is that? She asked, her voice softer now. Jack did not answer immediately. He turned the folder in his hands, his fingers tracing the edges as if confirming what he already suspected, and then he opened it, slowly, deliberately, the sound of the seal breaking quiet but final. Inside were documents, not currency, not bundles, but pages, structured, official, filled with names, dates, coordinates, and something else. Something that made Jack's expression shift in a way Lily had not seen before, not fear, not shock, but recognition mixed with something deeper, something personal. These are not just records, he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Lily stepped closer, angling the flashlight so the words became clearer, and even without fully understanding them, she could feel the importance, the weight of information that was never meant to surface. "What do they mean?" she asked, and Jack exhaled slowly, his eyes still scanning the page. "They show who knew," he said, "who built this, who signed off on it, who made sure it disappeared." He paused, his jaw tightening just slightly, "and who was left out." Lily felt the shift again, not just in the room, but in him, like the discovery had moved from mystery into something personal, something that reached into his past in a way she could not fully see yet. Rex stepped closer, placing himself beside Jack as if grounding him in the moment. And Jack lowered the folder slightly, his gaze lifting to meet Lily's, steady. Resolved. "This is not about money anymore," he said, and the truth of that settled into the space between them, heavier than anything they had uncovered so far, because money could be hidden, could be taken, could be explained away, but this was something else entirely, something that connected decisions, people, and time in a way that could not simply be buried again. Lily nodded slowly, her voice quiet but certain as she spoke. "Then we do not let it disappear," and Jack held her gaze for a moment before giving a single nod in return, the kind of nod that did not just agree, but committed, because whatever this was, whatever it led to, it had already begun to change the path they were on. And above them, the field remained still, the town continued its routine, and the people who had laughed still believed they understood what that land was worth, but beneath their feet, the truth had already surfaced, and it was only a matter of time before the world realized that nothing about that place had ever been ordinary.